But when he did find spoken words for it, they came to him coherently, though slowly. How was this? Was it you? Once more, the two spectators started, as he turned upon her with a frightful suddenness. But she sat perfectly still in his grasp, and only said in a low voice, "I entreat you, good gentlemen, do not come near us, do not speak, do not move." "Hark!" he exclaimed. Whose voice was that? His hands released her as he uttered this cry, and went up to his white hair, which they tore in a frenzy. It died out as everything but his shoemaking did die out of him, and he refolded his little packet and tried to secure it in his breast. But he still looked at her, and gloomily shook his head. "No, no, no, you are too young, too blooming. It can't be. See what the prisoner is." These are not the hands she knew. This is not the face she knew. This is not a voice she ever heard. No, no, she was. He was, before the slow years of the North Tower ages ago. "What is your name, my gentle angel?" Hailing his softened tone and manner, his daughter fell upon her knees before him, with her appealing hands upon his breast. "So, sir, at another time you shall know my name, and who my mother was, and who my father, and how I never knew their hard, hard history. But I cannot tell you at this time, and I cannot tell you here. All that I may tell you here and now is that I pray to you to touch me and to bless me. Kiss me, kiss me. Oh, my dear, my dear." His cold white head mingled with her radiant hair, which warmed and lighted it as though it were the light of freedom shining on him. "If you hear in my voice, I don't know that it is so, but I hope it is. If you hear in my voice any resemblance to a voice that once was sweet music in your ears, weep for it, weep for it. If you touch. In touching my hair, anything that recalls a beloved head that lay on your breast when you were young and free, weep for it, weep for it. If, when I hint to you of a home that is before us, where I will be true to you with all my duty and with all my faithful service, I bring back the remembrance of a home long desolate, while your poor heart pined away, weep for it, weep for it." She held him closer round the neck, and rocked him on her breast like a child. "If, when I tell you, dearest dear, that your agony is over, and that I have come here to take you from it, and that we go to England to be at peace and at rest, I cause you to think of your useful life laid waste, and of our native France so wicked to you, weep for it, weep for it. And if, when I shall tell you of my name, and of my father who is living, and of my mother who is dead, you learn that I have to kneel to my honored father, and implore his pardon for having never for his sake striven all day and lain awake and wept all night, because the love of my poor mother hid his torture from me. Weep for it, weep for it. Weep for her, then. And for me, good gentlemen, thank God. I feel his sacred tears upon my face, and his sobs strike against my heart. Oh, see, thank God for us, thank God." He had sunk in her arms, and his face dropped on her breast. A sight so touching, yet so terrible in the tremendous wrong and suffering which had gone before it, that the two beholders covered their faces. That the two beholders covered their faces. When the quiet of the garret had been long undisturbed, and his heaving breast and shaken form had long yielded to the calm that must follow all storms. Emblem to humanity, of the rest and silence into which the storm called life must hush at last, they came forward to raise the father and daughter from the ground. He had gradually dropped to the floor and lay there in a lethargy, worn out. She had nestled down with him, that his head might lie upon her arm, and her hair drooping over him curtained him from the light. "If, without disturbing him," she said, raising her hand to Mr. Lorry as he stooped over them, after repeated blowings of his nose. "All could be arranged for our leaving Paris at once, so that, from the very door, he could be taken away." "But consider, is he fit for the journey?" asked Mr. Lorry. "More fit for that, I think, than to remain in this city, so dreadful to him." "It is true," said Defarge, who was kneeling to look on and hear. "More than that, Monsieur Manette is, for all reasons, best out of France. Say, shall I hire a carriage and post horses?" "That's business," said Mr. Lorry, resuming on the shortest notice his methodical manners. "And if business is to be done, I had better do it." "Then be so kind," urged Miss Manette, "as to leave us here. You see how composed he has become, and you cannot be afraid to leave him with me now. Why should you be? If you will lock the door to secure us from interruption. I do not doubt that you will find him, when you come back, as quiet as you leave him. In any case, I will take care of him until you return, and then we will remove him straight." Both Mr. Lorry and Defarge were rather disinclined to this course, and in favor of one of them remaining. But as there were not only carriage and horses to be seen to, but travelling papers, and as time pressed, for the day was drawing to an end, it came at last to their hastily dividing the business that was necessary to be done, and hurrying away to do it. Then, as the darkness closed in, the daughter laid her head down on the hard ground close at the father's side, and watched him. The darkness deepened and deepened, and they both lay quiet, until a light gleamed through the chinks in the wall. Mr. Lorry and Monsieur Defarge had made all ready for the journey, and had brought with them, besides travelling cloaks and wrappers, bread and meat, wine and hot coffee. Monsieur Defarge put this provender, and the lamp he carried, on the shoemaker's bench. There was nothing else in the garret but a pallet bed. And he and Mr. Lorry roused the captive, and assisted him to his feet. No human intelligence could have read the mysteries of his mind in the scared blank wonder of his face. Whether he knew what had happened, whether he recollected what they had said to him, whether he knew that he was free, were questions which no sagacity could have solved. They tried speaking to him, but he was so confused and so very slow to answer that they took fright at his bewilderment and agreed for the time to tamper with him no more. He had a wild, lost manner of occasionally clasping his head in his hands that had not been seen in him before. Yet, he had some pleasure in the mere sound of his daughter's voice, and invariably turned to it when she spoke. In the submissive way of one long accustomed to obey under coercion, he ate and drank what they gave him to eat and drink, and put on the cloak and other wrappings that they gave him to wear. He readily responded to his daughter's drawing her arm through his, and took, and kept her hand in both his own. They began to descend, Monsieur Defarge going first with the lamp, Mr. Lorry closing the little procession. They had not traversed many steps of the long main staircase when he stopped, and stared at the roof and round at the walls. "You remember the place, my father. You remember coming up here. What did you say?" But before she could repeat the question, he murmured an answer as if she had repeated it. "Remember? No, I don't remember. It was so very long ago." That he had no recollection whatever of his having been brought from his prison to that house was apparent to them. They heard him mutter, 105 North Tower, and when he looked about him, it evidently was for the strong fortress walls which had long encompassed him. On their reaching the courtyard, he instinctively altered his tread, as being in expectation of a drawbridge. And when there was no drawbridge, and he saw the carriage waiting in the open street, he dropped his daughter's hand and clasped his head again. No crowd was about the door. No people were discernible at any of the many windows. Not even a chance passer-by was in the street. An unnatural silence and desertion reigned there. No crowd was about the door. No people were discernible at any of the many windows. Not even a chance passer-by was in the street. An unnatural silence and desertion reigned there. Only one soul was to be seen, and that was Madame Defarge, who leaned against the door-post, knitting, and saw nothing. The prisoner had got into a coach, and his daughter had followed him, when Mr. Lorry's feet were arrested on the step by his asking, miserably, for his shoemaking tools and the unfinished shoes. Madame Defarge immediately called to her husband that she would get them, and went, knitting, out of the lamplight, through the courtyard. She quickly brought them down and handed them in, and immediately afterwards leaned against the door-post, knitting, and saw nothing. Defarge got upon the box and gave the word to the barrier. The postilion cracked his whip, and they clattered away under the feeble overswinging lamps. Under the overswinging lamps, swinging ever brighter in the better streets, and ever dimmer in the worse. And by lighted shops, gay crowds, illuminated coffee houses and theater doors, to one of the city gates. Soldiers with lanterns at the guardhouse there. Your papers, travelers. See here, then, Monsieur the officer. said Defarge, getting down and taking him gravely apart. "These are the papers of Monsieur inside, with the white head. They were consigned to me, with him, at the—" He dropped his voice. There was a flutter among the military lanterns, and one of them being handed into the coach by an arm in uniform. The eyes connected with the arm looked, not an every-day or an every-night look, at Monsieur with the white head. "It is well. Forward," from the uniform. "Adieu," from Defarge. And so, under a short grove of feebler and feebler overswinging lamps, out under the great grove of stars. Beneath that arch of unmoved and eternal lights. Some, so remote from this little earth that the learned tell us it is doubtful whether their rays have even yet discovered it, as a point in space where anything is suffered or done. The shadows of the night were broad and black. All through the cold and restless interval, until dawn, they once more whispered in the ears of Mr. Jarvis Lorry, sitting opposite the buried man who had been dug out, and wondering what subtle powers were forever lost to him, and what were capable of restoration. The old inquiry, "I hope you care to be recalled to life." And the old answer, "I can't say." The end of the first book. Tellson's Bank by Temple Bar was an old-fashioned place, even in the year 1780. It was very small, very dark, very ugly, very incommodious. It was an old-fashioned place, moreover, in the moral attribute that the partners in the house were proud of its smallness, proud of its darkness, proud of its ugliness, proud of its incommodiousness. They were even boastful of its eminence in those particulars, and were fired by an express conviction that, if it were less objectionable, it would be less respectable. This was no passive belief, but an active weapon which they flashed at more convenient places of business. Tellson's, they said, wanted no elbow room. Tellson's wanted no light. Tellson's wanted no embellishment. Noakes and Coase might, or Snooks Brothers might, but Tellson's, thank heaven. Any one of these partners would have disinherited his son on the question of rebuilding Tellson. In this respect, the house was much on a par with the country, which did very often disinherit its sons for suggesting improvements in laws and customs that had long been highly objectionable, but were only the more respectable. Thus it had come to pass that Tellson's was the triumphant perfection of its. After bursting open idiotic obstinacy with a weak rattle in its throat, you fell into Tellson's down 2 steps, and came to your senses in a miserable little shop, 2 little counters. The oldest of men made your check shake and rustled it, while they examined the signature by of windows, which were always under a shower bath of mud from Fleet Street, and which were made the dingier by their own iron bars proper, and the heavy shadow of Temple Bar. If your business necessitated your seeing the house, you were put into a species of condemned hold at the back, where you meditated on a misspent life until the house came with its hands in its pockets, and you could hardly blink at it in the dismal twilight. Your money came out of, or went into, wormy old wooden drawers, particles of which flew up your nose and down your throat when they were opened and shut. Your bank notes had a musty odor, as if they were fast decomposing into rags again. Your plate was stowed away among the neighboring cesspools. Your plate was stowed away among the neighboring cesspools, and evil communications corrupted its good polish in a day or two. Your deeds got into extemporized strong rooms made of kitchens and sculleries, and fretted all the fat out of their parchments into the banking house air. Your lighter boxes of family papers went upstairs into a Barmecide room that always had a great dining table in it and never had a dinner, and where, even in the year 1780, the first letters written to you by your old love or by your little children were but newly released from the horror of being ogled through the windows, by the heads exposed on Temple Bar with an insensate brutality and ferocity worthy of Abyssinia or Ashanti. But indeed, at that time, putting to death was a recipe much in vogue with all trades and professions, and not least of all with Tellson. S. Death is nature's remedy for all things, and why not legislation? S. Accordingly, the forger was put to death. The utterer of a bad note was put to death. The unlawful opener of a letter was put to death. The purloiner of 40 shillings and sixpence was put to death. The holder of a horse at Tellson's door, who made off with it, was put to death. The coiner of a bad shilling was put to death. The sounders of 3/4 of the notes in the whole gamut of crime were put to death. Not that it did the least good in the way of prevention. It might almost have been worth remarking that the fact was exactly the reverse. But it cleared off, as to this world, the trouble of each particular case, and left nothing else connected with it to be looked after. Thus, Tellson's, in its day, like greater places of business, its contemporaries, had taken so many lives that, if the heads laid low before it had been ranged on Temple Bar instead of being privately disposed of, they would probably have excluded what little light the ground floor had, in a rather significant manner. Cramped in all kinds of dim cupboards and hutches at Tellson's, the oldest of men carried on the business gravely. When they took a young man into Tellson's London house, they hid him somewhere till he was old. They kept him in a dark place, like a cheese, until he had the full Telson flavor and blue mold upon him. Then only was he permitted to be seen, spectacularly poring over large books and casting his breeches and gaiters into the general weight of the establishment. Outside Tellson's, never by any means in it, unless called in, was an odd-job man, an occasional porter and messenger, who served as the live sign of the house. He was never absent during business hours, unless upon an errand, and then he was represented by his son, a grisly urchin of 12, who was his express image. People understood that Tellson, in a stately way, tolerated the odd-job man. The house had always tolerated some person in that capacity, and time and tide had drifted this person to the post. His surname was Cruncher, and on the youthful occasion of his renouncing by proxy the works of darkness in the easterly parish church of Houndsditch, he had received the added appellation of Jerry. The scene was Mr. Cruncher's private lodging in Hanging Sword Alley, Whitefriars. The time, 7:30 of the clock on a windy March morning, Anno Domini 1780. Mr. Cruncher himself always spoke of the year of our Lord as Anno Dominos, apparently under the impression that the Christian era dated from the invention of a popular game by a lady who had bestowed her name upon it. Mr. Cruncher's apartments were not in a savory neighborhood, and were but 2 in number, even if a closet with a single pane of glass in it might be counted as one. But they were very decently kept. Early as it was, on the windy March morning, the room in which he lay abed was already scrubbed throughout, and between the cups and saucers arranged for breakfast, and the lumbering deal table, a very clean white cloth was spread. He exclaimed in a voice of dire exasperation, "Bust me, if she..." A woman of orderly and in appearance rose from her knees in a corner, sufficient haste and trepidation to show that she was the person referred. "What?" said Mr. King out of bed for a boot. "You're at it again." After hailing the morn with this second, he threw a woman as a third. It was a very muddy boot. Introduced the odd circumstance connected Cruncher's domestic economy. That, whereas he often came her banking hours with clean boots, often got up next morning to find the same covered with clay. Said Mr. Cruncher, varying his fee after missing his mark. "What are you up to, a gurrowator?" "I was only saying my prayers." "Saying your prayers? You're a What do you mean by flopping yourself down and me?" "I was not praying. I was praying for you." "You were, and if you were, I won't be took the liberty." "Here, your mother woman, young Jerry, praying again your father's prosperity. Beautiful mother you have, my son. You've got a religious mother, my boy, going and fly down and praying that the bread and butter snatched out of the mouth of her only child." Master Cruncher, in his shirt, took this very and, turning to his mother, deprecated any praying away of his person. "And what do you conceited female," said Mr. with unconscious inconsistency, "that the worth of your prayer, name the price that you put your they only come from the heart, Jerry. They are worth no more than that." "Worth no more than that, Mr. Cruncher. Much then. Whether or no, I won't be. I tell you, I can't afford it. I'm not going to be made unlucky king. If you must go flopping yourself, flop in favor of your child, and not in opposition. If I had had an unnatural wife, and this had had any but an unnatural mother, I might have made some money last instead of being counter-prayed and religiously circumvented. Worst of luck." "Be me," said Mr. Cruncher, who all this time had been clothes. "If I ain't piety and one blowed thing been choused this last week bad luck as ever a poor devil of tradesman met with. Ye dress yourself, my boy. I clean my boots, keep a eye now and then, and if you see any sign flopping, give me a call. For I tell you," here's wife once more, "I won't be gone a manner. I am as a hackney coach. I'm as sleepy as my lines is strained that I shouldn't know, if it wasn't for the which was me somebody else, yet I'm not for it in pocket. And it's my you've been at it from morning to night, prevent me from being the better for it in pocket, and I won't put up with it, a gurrowaiter, you say now." In addition, such phrases as, "Ah, yes, you're religious too. You wouldn't put yourself in opposition to the interests of your child, would you? Not you." And throwing off other sarcasms from the whirling grindstone of his Mr. Cruncher betook him his boot cleaning and his general for business. In the meantime, whose head was garnished with spikes, and whose young stood close by one another, as his father kept the required watch of her. He greatly that poor woman at intervals, out of his sleeping closet, where he made it, with a suppressed, "You are going to flop, mother, Loa, father," and, after rictitious alarm, darting in an undutiful grin. Mr. Cruncher's temper was not improved when he came to his breakfast. He resented Mrs. Crunching Grace with particular animosity. Now turn. Cruncher worried his breakfast than ate it, growling over any four-footed inmate of a menagerie. Towards 9 o'clock he smoothed aspect, and presentable and businesslike an exterior as he could owe his natural self with to the occupation of the day, could scarcely be called a trade, in favorite description of himself as tradesman. Met with, "Harry, dress yourself, my boy. While I clean my boots, keep a eye upon now and then, and if you see any more flopping, give me a call. For I tell you," here he a wife once more, "I won't be gone a manner. I am as rickety coach. I'm as sleepy. My lines is strained to that I shouldn't know. If it wasn't in which was me and which else, yet I'm none the better pocket. And it's my sin that you've been at it from morning to night, from being the better for it in pocket. I won't put up with it. A gurrowaiter. And what do you say now?" Such phrases as "ah, yes, too. You would in opposition to the interests of your husband, would you? Not you." Throwing off other sarcastic spark, whirling grindstone of his indignation. Mr. Cruncher self to his boot cleaning and all preparation for business. In the meantime, his son was garnished with tenderer spite, and whose young eyes stood close by one another, as his father's did, kept the required watch upon his mother. He greatly disturbed that poor woman at intervals by darting out of his sleeping closet, where he made his toilet with a suppressed cry of, "You are going to flop, mother." "Halloa, father!" And, after raising this fictitious alarm, darting in again with an undutiful grin. Mr. Cruncher's temper was not at all improved when he came to his breakfast. He resented Mrs. Cruncher's saying grace with particular animosity. "Now, a gurrowaiter, what are you up to? At it again?" His wife explained that she had merely asked a blessing. "Don't do it," said Mr. Crunches, looking about, as if he rather expected to see the loaf disappear under the efficacy of his wife's petitions. "I ain't a-going to be blessed out of house and home. I won't have my wittles blessed off my table. Keep still." Exceedingly red-eyed and grim, as if he had been up all night at a party which had taken anything but a convivial turn, Jerry Cruncher worried his breakfast rather than ate it, growling over it like any four-footed inmate of a menagerie. Towards 9 o'clock he smoothed his ruffled aspect, and, presenting as respectable and businesslike an exterior as he could overlay his natural self with, issued forth to the occupation of the day. It could scarcely be called a trade, in spite of his favorite description of himself as a honest tradesman. His stock consisted of a wooden stool made out of a broken-backed chair cut down, which stool young Jerry, walking at his father's side, carried every morning to beneath the banking-house window that was nearest Temple Bar, where, with the addition of the first handful of straw that could be gleaned from any passing vehicle, to keep the cold and wet from the odd job man's feet, it formed the encampment for the day. On this post of his, Mr. Cruncher was as well known to Fleet Street and the Temple as the bar itself, and was almost as in-looking. Encamped at 9:15, in good time to touch his three-cornered hat to the oldest of men as they passed into Tellson. Jerry took up his station on this windy March morning, with young Jerry standing by him, when not engaged in making forays through the bar, to inflict bodily and mental injuries of an acute description on passing boys who were small enough for his amiable purpose. Father and son, extremely like each other, looking silently on at the morning traffic in Fleet Street, with their two heads as near to one another as the two eyes of each were, bore a considerable resemblance to a pair of monkeys. The resemblance was not lessened by the accidental circumstance that the mature Jerry bit and spat out straw, while the twinkling eyes of the youthful Jerry were as restlessly watchful of him as of everything else in Fleet Street. The head of one of the regular indoor messengers attached to Tellson's establishment was put through the door, and the word was given. "Porter wanted." "Hooray, father, here's an early job to begin with." Having thus given his parent Godspeed, young Jerry seated himself on the stool, entered on his reversionary interest in the straw his father had been chewing, and cogitated. "Always rusty. His fingers is always rusty," muttered young Jerry. "Where does my father get all that iron rust from? He don't get no iron rust here." "You know the Old Bailey well, no doubt," said one of the oldest of clerks to Jerry the messenger. "Yees, sir," returned Jerry in something of a dogged manner. "I do know the Bailey." "Just so. And you know Mr. Lorry." "I know Mr. Lorry, sir, much better than I know the Bailey." "Much better," said Jerry, not unlike a reluctant witness at the establishment in question. "Then I, as a honest tradesman, wish to know the Bailey." "Very well. Find the door where the witnesses go in, and show the doorkeeper this note for Mr. Lorry. He will then let you in." "Into the court, sir." "Into the court." Mr. Cruncher's eyes seemed to get a little closer to one another, and to interchange the inquiry. "What do you think of this?" "Am I to wait in the court, sir?" he asked, as the result of that conference. "I am going to tell you. The doorkeeper will pass the note to Mr. Lorry." "And do you make any gesture that will attract Mr. Lorry's attention and show him where you stand. Then what you have to do is to remain there until he wants you." "Is that all, sir?" "That's all. He wishes to have a messenger at hand. This is to tell him you are there." As the ancient clerk deliberately folded and superscribed the note, Mr. Cruncher, after surveying him in silence until he came to the blotting paper stage, remarked, "I suppose they'll be trying forgeries this morning." "Treason." "That's quartering," said Jerry. "Barbarous." "It is the law," remarked the ancient clerk, turning his surprised spectacles upon him. "It is the law. It's hard in the law to spile a man, I think. It's hard enough to kill him, but it's worry hard to spile him, sir." "Not at all," retained the ancient clerk. "Speak well of the law. Take care of your chest and voice, my good friend, and leave the law to take care of itself. I give you that advice." "It's the damp, sir. What settles on my chest and voice?" said Jerry. "I leave you to judge what a damp way of earning a living mine is." "Well, well," said the old clerk. "We all have our various ways of gaining a livelihood. Some of us have damp ways and some of us have dry ways. Here is the letter. Go along." Jerry took the letter, and remarking to himself with less internal deference than he made an outward show of, "You are a lean old one, too," made his bow, informed his son in passing of his destination, and went his way. They hanged at Tyburn in those days, so the street outside Newgate had not obtained one infamous notoriety that has since attached to it. But the jail was a vile place, in which most kinds of debauchery and villainy were practiced, and where dire diseases were bred, that came into court with the prisoners, and sometimes rushed straight from the dock at my Lord Chief Justice himself, and pulled him off the bench. It had more than once happened that the judge in the black cap pronounced his own doom as certainly as the prisoner and rode, and shaming few good citizens, if any. So powerful is use, and so desirable to be good use in the beginning. It was famous, too, for the pillory, a wise old institution that inflicted a punishment of which no one could foresee the extent. Also for the whipping post, another dear old institution. Very humanizing institution. Very humanizing and softening to behold in action. Also for extensive transactions in blood money. Another fragment of ancestral wisdom, systematically leading to the most frightful mercenary crimes that could be committed under heaven. Altogether, the Old Bailey at that date was a choice illustration of the precept. That whatever is right. An aphorism that would be as final as it is lazy, did it not include the troublesome consequence that nothing that ever was wrong. Making his way through the tainted crowd, dispersed up and down this hideous scene of action, with the skill of a man accustomed to make his way quietly. The messenger found out the door he sought, and handed in his letter through a trap in it. For people then paid to see the play at the Old Bailey, just as they paid to see the play in Bedlam. Only the former entertainment was much the dearer. Therefore, all the Old Bailey doors were well guarded, except, indeed, the social doors by which the criminals got there, and those were always left wide open. After some delay and demur, the door grudgingly turned on its hinges a very little way, and allowed Mr. Jerry Cruncher to squeeze himself into court. "What's on?" he asked in a whisper of the man he found himself next to. "Nothing yet." "What's coming on?" "The treason case." "The quartering one, eh?" "Ah," returned the man with a relish. "He'll be drawn on a hurdle to be half hanged, and then he'll be taken down and sliced before his own face, and then his inside will be taken out and burnt while he looks on, and then his head will be chopped off, and he'll be cut into quarters. That's the sentence." "If he's found guilty, you mean to say," Jerry added by way of proviso. "Oh, they'll find him guilty," said the other. "Don't you be afraid of that." Mr. Cruncher's attention was here diverted to the doorkeeper, whom he saw making his way to Mr. Lorry, with the note in his hand. Mr. Lorry sat at a table, among the gentlemen in wigs. Not far from a wigged gentleman, the prisoner's counsel, who had a great bundle of papers before him, quietly nodded and sat down again. "What's he got to do with the case?" There went out, and the prisoner was brought in and put to the bar. Everybody present, except the one wigged gentleman who looked at the ceiling, to help themselves at anybody's cost to a view of him with the waves of other beer, and gin and tea with the waves of other beer, and gin and tea and coffee, and what not that flowed at him, and already broke upon the great windows behind him in an impure mist and rain. The object of all this staring and blaring was a young man of about 25, well-grown and well-looking, with a sunburnt cheek and a dark eye. His condition, was that of a young gentleman. He was plainly dressed in black or very dark gray, and his hair, which was long and dark, was gathered in a ribbon at the back of his neck. More to be out of his way than for ornament, as an emotion of the mind will express itself through any covering of the body. So the paleness which his situation engendered came through the brown upon his cheek, showing the soul to be stronger than the sun. He was otherwise quite self-possessed, bowed to the judge, and stood quiet. The sort of interest with which this man was stared and breathed at was not a sort that elevated humanity. Had he stood in peril of a less horrible sentence, had there been a chance of any one of its savage details being spared, by just so much would he have lost in his fascination. The form that was to be doomed to be so shamefully mangled was the sight. The immortal creature that was to be so butchered and torn asunder yielded the sensation. Whatever gloss the various spectators put upon the interest, according to their several arts and powers of self-deceit, the interest was, at the root of it, ogreish. Silence in the court. Charles Darnay had yesterday pleaded not guilty to an indictment denouncing him, with infinite jingle and jangle, for that he was a false traitor to our serene. Illustrious, excellent, and so forth, Prince our Lord the King, by reason of his having. On divers occasions, and by divers means and ways, assisted Louis, the French king, in his wars against our said serene, illustrious, excellent, and so forth. That was to say, by coming and going between the dominions of our said serene, illustrious, excellent, and so forth, and those of the said French Louis, and wickedly, falsely, traitor made out with huge satisfaction, and so arrived circuitously at the understanding that the aforesaid, and over again aforesaid, Charles Darnay, stood there before him upon his trial, that the jury were swearing in, and that Mr. Attorney General was making ready to speak. The accused who was, and who knew he was being mentally hanged, beheaded, and quartered by everybody there, neither flinched from the situation, nor assumed any theatrical air in it. He was quiet and attentive, watched the opening proceedings with a grave interest, and stood with his hands resting on the slab of wood before him, so composedly that they had not displaced a leaf of the herbs with which it was strewn. The court was all bestrewn with herbs and sprinkled with vinegar, as a precaution against jail air and jail fever. Over the prisoner's head there was a mirror, to throw the light down upon him. Crowds of the wicked and the wretched had been reflected in it, and had passed from its surface and this earth's together. Haunted in a most ghastly manner that abominable place would have been, if the glass could ever have rendered back its reflections, as the ocean is one day to give up its dead. Some passing thought of the infamy and disgrace for which it had been reserved may have struck the prisoner's mind. Be that as it may, a change in his position making him conscious of a bar of light across his face, he looked up, and when he saw the glass his face flushed, and his right hand pushed the herbs away. It happened that the action turned his face to that side of the court which was on his left, about on a level with his eyes. There sat, in that corner of the judge's bench, two persons upon whom his look immediately rested. So immediately, and so much to the changing of his aspect, that all the eyes that were turned upon him turned to them. The spectators saw in the two figures a young lady of little more than 20, and a gentleman who was evidently her father, a man of a very remarkable appearance in respect of the absolute whiteness of his hair and a certain indescribable intensity of face. Not of an active kind, but pondering and self-communing. When this expression was upon him, he looked as if he were old, but when it was stirred and broken up, as it was now in a moment on his speaking to his daughter, he became a handsome man, not past the prime of life. His daughter had one of her hands drawn through his arm, as she sat by him, and the other pressed upon it. She had drawn close to him, in her dread of the scene, and in her pity for the prisoner. Her forehead had been strikingly expressive of an engrossing terror and compassion that saw nothing but the peril of the accused. This had been so very noticeable, so very powerfully and naturally shown, that starers who had had no pity for him were touched by her, and the whisper went about, "Who are they?" Jerry, the messenger, who had made his own observations, in his own manner, and who had been sucking the rust off his fingers in his absorption, stretched his neck to hear who they were. The crowd about him had pressed and passed the inquiry on to the nearest attendant, and from him it had been more slowly pressed and passed back. At last it got to Jerry. Witnesses. For which side? Against. Against what side? The prisoner S. The judge, whose eyes had gone in the general direction, recalled them, leaned back in his seat, and looked steadily at the man whose life was in his hand, as Mr. Attorney General rose to spin the rope, grind the axe, and hammer the nails into the scaffold. Mr. Attorney General had to inform the jury that the prisoner before them, though young in years, was old in the treasonable practices which claimed the forfeit of his life. That this correspondence with the public enemy was not a correspondence of today, or of yesterday, or even of last year, or of the year before. That it was certain the prisoner had, for longer than that, been in the habit of passing and repassing between France and England, on secret business of which he could give no honest account. That, if it were in the nature of traitorous ways to thrive, which happily it never was, the real wickedness and guilt of his business might have remained undiscovered. That Providence, however, had put it into the heart of a person who was beyond fear and beyond reproach, to ferret out the nature of the prisoner's schemes, and struck with horror, to disclose them to His Majesty's Chief Secretary of State and most honorable Privy Council, that this patriot would be produced before them, that his position and attitude were, on the whole, sublime, that he had been the prisoner's friend, but at once in an auspicious and an evil hour detecting his infamy. Had resolved to immolate the traitor he could no longer cherish in his bosom, on the sacred altar of his country. That, if statues were decreed in Britain, as in ancient Greece and Rome, to public benefactors, this shining citizen would assuredly have had one.